Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman. Welcome to our 36th installment in the Torah portion of the week. We're holding by Parshas Beha'aloscha in the book of Numbers, where it speaks about the kindling of the lamps, i.e., speaking about the lighting of the menorah. Also speaks about the Jewish people complaining in the desert, saying that they wish they had all this great food that they had in Egypt. They missed the watermelon, etc. So there's quite a bit to discuss here. We'll see how far we get. The Torah here says, beginning of Parshas Beha'aloscha, chapter 8, the Torah here says that Aaron did so toward the face of the menorah. He kindled its lamps as Hashem had commanded Moshe. Then it goes into discussion of the workmanship of the menorah, etc. So there's an interesting thing. There's an interesting thing over here. It says Moiv Rebbe Ravagon Moshe Star Moshlita. Should be well. He mentions over here, Rashi says, when it says Vayaskein Aaron, when it says that Aaron did this, right, and he lit the menorah, Rashi here says, in order to show the praise of Aaron, that he didn't change, right? Aaron was the same, right? He stayed the same. He was consistent, etc. So some say that what it means is that he didn't change himself. In other words, he was given over this job to do for at least the time they were in the desert. And he could have thought he was so great because he was able to do this himself, and God only allowed him to do it. But even though he merited that, nonetheless, he was the same person. He didn't change. Now, that's one idea. Another idea, and maybe we'll flush that out a little bit, actually before we get to this other idea, is that if a person does great things, they know what their self-worth is. In other words, the importance they have to whatever it is, to their job, their family, other things. So if other people praise them, and they take stock of them, and they make them guest speakers, they honor them, like different things. So it could very easily, a person could take that and have gaiva, right? He may think he's God's gift to the world. After all, look what he does. He helps save lives. He gives a lot of money to charity. He does all these different things. So he could look at himself and say, look how great I am compared to everybody else. So here the praise is, even though Aaron was taken amongst the Jewish people and chosen in order to do this, didn't change him. Right? It definitely didn't change him. He stayed the same. He didn't think that he was God's gift to the world. He did what he needed to do. Right? So it shows a tremendous amount of anivis, of humility. Right? Something very much lacking in this generation. It's very easy, especially if a person has a lot of money, has a lot of power, has fame, right? We forget. A person could easily forget where all that came from. And their character traits could, get flushed right down the toilet. I mean, it's very easy when we're used to certain things, etc. So somebody who has that, but stays humble, that's a tremendous thing. Now, we'll mention an interesting story or an interesting idea from this, and that is that somebody who returns to Judaism, someone born a Jew but wasn't religious, becomes religious, or someone, let's say, converts to Judaism, so they know where they came from. They're always reminded, right? Their family members, etc. They're always reminded where they came from. So in that sense, it's a lot easier to be humble. Because if we have humble beginnings and we become great later, or in between, or whatever the case is, we can never forget where we came from. Now, a person who makes it, let's say financially, he's got power, he's got other things, and he started off very poor. So I could do one of two things. Either that could keep him humble and always remember where he came from, because he didn't always have it easy. Because he didn't have it easy, it should make him humble. That if God wanted to, he's got this power, he's got this wealth, God could easily take it away. Because if a person is given wealth, it's there to help others. If you don't do what you're supposed to do with it, you feel it's a yoke, so to speak, because you do help others, but people are banging on the door left and right because they need help, etc. A person, can get tiring after a while. A person may say, I help so much and I give so much, but I have no life. They follow me to synagogue. They follow you to, wherever you feel like you don't have a life. You just want to scream out and say, just get a job, do something. Like, why are you sponging off of me? Well, that's the wrong attitude. That is definitely the wrong attitude, because if God gave it to you, you have a great responsibility. Look at the book of Ruth. Look what happened to Elimelech. There was a famine. People were banging down his door left and right in order that he should help them. And he just got tired after a while. He had no free time. But that was the wrong attitude, and we know what the result was, right? He left in the middle of a famine when people needed his help, went to Moab. His sons marry non-Jews, and he dies. And they die also. And his wealth is gone. So that is a very serious repercussion. So the higher level a person is, the more severely he's going to be punished. So in this case, God takes it away. Not only does he take it away, but he dies. And his kids die. So they went from riches to rags. That Naomi, his wife, didn't have money to pay for the burial, that they lost everything. So the two non-Jewish daughter-in-laws had to pay for the burial of their husbands. You say, how the mighty have fallen. But see, someone who has humble beginnings, they have a shake. They have a shot in order to remember what the humble beginnings were. Take someone like David HaMelech. David HaMelech always remembered where he came from. Right? He comes from Ruth. Ruth is a convert. Where does Ruth come from? Ruth comes from Moab. Right? He comes from the union of Lot and his daughters. So it's interesting that union produces generations later Ruth, and then 5 generations later produces King David. So that's an unbelievable thing. So King David understood where he came from, used it to his advantage. Because even though he came to power, and God made him king, and he had all these difficulties in his life, nonetheless, he knew where he came from. He understood where his roots were. Nonetheless, it made him even greater. Because he couldn't rest on his laurels. He couldn't say, oh look, I was born into it. My name is Rockefellerstein. Born into royalty. Right? Born into money. Born into wealth. No. It's one reason, one potential reason why the Messiah comes from such a place. Right? It has to come from, he has to show this from the line of David. Otherwise, it can't be the Messiah. It's one of the things. If it doesn't come from the line of David, he's not the Messiah. Nonetheless, he doesn't forget where he came from. Because he doesn't forget where he came from, he learns and understands what humility is. Now, that's not necessarily such an easy thing to do. Because the reason is because once a person, let's say they came from nothing, and they worked themselves up and eventually became wealthy and became powerful. So it could make them humble in the sense that they remember where they came from. And that creates some sort of balance. Because when they want to get high in themselves and say, look how great I am, blah, 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 they remember that, it puts them in their place. Or it could drive people crazy. Take somebody like Achashverosh. Achashverosh ends up killing Queen Vashti because of this. He tells her to come out in the book of Esther. He tells her to come out, seemingly not wearing anything, and she would have had she not either grown a tail or had spots on her. But she wasn't the most prude of women, let's say. She didn't grow up in Victorian England. We were the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. So she makes fun of Achashverosh. All right, Achashverosh drank, right, and he drank too much, and she makes fun of him, saying, my grandfather, are you kidding? Look how much he could have drunk, and he wasn't drunk, acting like a buffoon, like you are. But that's not what got him. That's not what got him so mad that he wanted to kill her. What got him so mad? He called her out. She said, "I'm not coming." Right? She's embarrassed. She says, "I'm not coming." But she doesn't just say, "I'm not coming." She sends him a note. In the note it says, "I'm not coming, you stupid stable boy." How did Achashverosh start out? He started out as a stable boy. Right? He fed the horses, took care of them. It just so happens he ended up marrying royalty. And his claim to the throne is through her. So it's interesting that because she embarrassed him, and he got so angry and he kills her, but that was his claim to the throne. Right? So we have to look at the story, what's really going on in the book of Esther. But he got so angry. Why? Because this was like a battle axe for him. This was something that he couldn't handle. He didn't want to be reminded who he was. Yeah, he was a stable boy. He did take care of the horses, 100% true. But he didn't want to be reminded of that. Here he's the king of 127 provinces. He has great wealth, showing off the vessels of the temple itself. Someone's going to remind him that originally he was a stable boy and he's got humble beginnings. Oh no. So something like that is a detriment. You don't want to think about that. You want to think, oh, look what I am now. Forget what I was. Forget where I came from. It's embarrassing. Yeah. She opened her big mouth and he slammed it shut and killed her. So humble beginnings can be pushed underneath the rug. Can be pushed aside. So if somebody's high in themselves, they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear where they came from. They don't want to eat humble pie. Because look where they are now. Look how powerful they are now. Look what they're doing. They'll say, oh, so what? I came from humble beginnings. I made it myself. Kind of like they themselves took themselves out of the womb, started from nothing and built themselves up. It's called having a fat head. Hubris in the vernacular, or as we say in Hebrew, the Baal Gava. Or you want to say it in Yeshiva, he's the Baal Gaiva. He thinks he's so great. And everyone else is puny compared to him. So it can be looked at two ways. Here by Aaron, he was the same. Right? He had an unbelievable position, but it didn't change him. He stayed consistent. Not only that, it made him greater. The reason it makes him greater is because even though he had that great position, he still understands who he is. He still understands that he needs to be humble. And that humility is the name of the game. So he does that successfully, not changing. Many people would not be like that. Many people, if they had great fame and great wealth, it would change them. Probably not for the better. You take a look at, use one example. You take a look at professional athletes. Most of them, not coming with money. And all of a sudden, landing big money. So their ideals change. Their attitudes change. Most likely. Some give back to where they came from. Others don't. And it's not surprising. Because you don't want to remember that. You want to forget that. You want to move on. from what you did. I mean, there is something to that. Because if you considerably remember where you came from, it's depressing. Definitely depressing. On the other hand, it makes a great story. Because you overcame it. You became who you are despite it. That's tremendous growth if you remember the lesson. If you don't remember the lesson, then all of a sudden you change. And certainly not for the better. That's one idea. Another idea that my Rebbe points out, it says that the honor that Aaron gets is he doesn't change. So my Rebbe explains that when it comes to serving God, are we always perfect? Do we always make the correct blessing at the highest level? No. When a person works in spirituality, they go up and down. Right? Kind of like a sine curve, like an S curve. Up, you have plateaus, you go down, you come back up. You go down, you go back up. It's not consistent, per se. You go up and down. You're not going like this, slowly. Kind of like walking on flat land. You're not doing that. You're going up and down. So here my Rebbe says, by Aaron HaKohen, by Aaron himself, it tells the praise that it didn't change. That each time when he came to light the lights, he did it with great joy, great love for God himself. Now that's pretty incredible. The Talmud says that a tzaddik gamor, a pure, righteous tzaddik, cannot stand in the same place as a Baal Tshuva. In the place of someone who was born Jewish comes back to Judaism. Now why isn't that? Isn't a tzaddik gamor or a tzaddik, isn't he greater? He doesn't have the same taiva, same desires as someone who returns to Judaism. So he should be seen as greater. Reason being is that, okay, he started out a certain way, and he just kept growing and growing and growing. But someone who's had temptation, given in to temptation, gone far away and come back, so everything to him is fresh, or should be. So they work hard at everything that they do to overcome what they did in the past. So if they do that, they're not stagnant by any stretch. They keep learning. They keep growing. They keep wanting to be better. They can't rest on their laurels. Reason being is because they know where they came from. So, in that sense, a righteous person cannot stand there. He doesn't have the same temptations. He's not interested. He has no desire to ever eat ham or pork or bacon, whatever it is. He has no desire for that. Torah says it's forbidden. And that's it. Can't imagine what the taste is. Right? He'll say, yeah, it's probably very tasty, but my Father in heaven says I can't do it. Right? Not something I can do. But he's never had the taste. So if he's never had the taste, where's the trial? Where's the test? So someone who returns to Judaism has that test on a regular basis. Not that, necessarily is going to run out and, and start eating pork. He has what we call a treif urge. He has this non-kosher urge. I just have to do it. I have to have a pepperoni pizza. And he runs out and does it. No, he's had the temptation. Right? There are certain temptations maybe he falls back in to a certain extent. But he works on himself and he strives. So he's got temptations that a righteous person doesn't have. On the other hand, it's hard to say that the righteous person isn't greater. Extremely hard to say. So take someone who's righteous. He didn't start out righteous. But let's say he grew up in a family and there were righteous people in his family. let's say his grandparents, his father, his mother, let's say they were righteous in and of themselves. That doesn't mean he's going to be righteous, because the Torah is not a Yerusha. Torah is not an inheritance. So everyone has to stake out their Torah for themselves. If their father was righteous, his grandfather was righteous, it goes back 10 generations, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be righteous. I mean, it's a good pedigree, it's good genealogy, no guarantee. Right? There's absolutely no guarantee. So keep in mind that they started off a certain way, but they became who they were despite it. Now, someone who's born into that, we'll call them an FFB, right? An FFB is someone who's from birth. So for them, every week they had Shabbos, right? They had all the holidays. They celebrated. They had fast days. They had learning Torah. They had prayer. They had Jewish schools, religious schools, right? So of course they're going to go in that direction. Now there's no guarantee, right? We mentioned that. There's no guarantee. But you see, someone who starts out at that level, where you take everything for granted, that of course you're going to keep Shabbos. Of course you're going to keep what the Torah says. There's no diverging, because you believe it's absolute truth, because that's what you do. I mean, you may believe it subconsciously, but the reality is it's all around you. You have siblings that are religious. You have cousins that are religious. You go to family weddings. There are hundreds of people there just from your own family. So you're doing things, through osmosis. Maybe you never really thought of the bigger questions out there. Bad things happen to good people. Questions like that. Maybe you just never thought about it. Because maybe you took things for granted. Growing up in a religious household. There's a lot to say for that. But the idea is like this. That if a person grows up in such a family, it's tremendous responsibility. It's not going to be granted to you on a platter. It's going to make it a lot easier, no question. But at the same time, what's going to happen is that you could burn out. Yeah, this is what you're supposed to do. I mean, this is what you're born into. That's what you're supposed to do. But if you're born into such greatness, or let's say you have a great spiritual family, whatever the case is, so this is what you're expected to do. So now go out and do it. So some people may rise to the occasion. Learn long hours, become great people, become great teachers. Right? The pedigree helps. But you have to have the burning desire within. Someone who's got it now, after years and years of not doing anything, or doing very little. So now that light is always burning. Right? Someone who comes back to Judaism, they can't take anything for granted. Someone's an FFB, you can take everything for granted. So someone who's an FFB doesn't get burned out, that's pretty tremendous as well. They don't have these desires to go astray or do other things. Other people will. Right? But I'm talking about you, whoever that is. So, a person like that could take things for granted. But you see, if you take it for granted, then you can fall by the wayside. If you don't take it for granted and you work at it, then you can reach the highest level. Again, you had a good start. You had a good base. A person could veer off. There's no guarantee, even with the greatest base in the world. So that's why as well, when you had Yitzchak and Rivka, and they both pray, find out what's going on with Rivka, and they both, what's going on with their kids inside her. So the commentaries tell us that the prayers of Yitzchak were answered first. You tell me that Rivka came, her father was evil, so she's a tzaddikiz bas Rasha, right, the daughter of an evil person. And Yitzchak is a tzaddik ben tzaddik, Right? He's a righteous person, the son of a righteous person. So the reason his prayer is looked at as being stronger is because he doesn't take anything for granted. Not only that, his father was so great, his father was the pillar, the beginning of the Jewish people of all nations, that's Abraham himself. So his father was top dog, my language. Right? He was a flash, an unbelievable flash in the world. Because everyone else was worshiping their pocket god. You know, here's Bob, don't leave home without him. And he brought absolute monotheism to the world. Changed the face of the world. So he's the pillar of where the Jewish people come from. So you're his son. You know, it would probably make it pretty easy to go in his direction. But he still had to do it. Granted, Yishmael was also his son also. You know, a stepson. Right? They were a different mother. I mean, it was his son. Don't get me wrong, different mother. But Yishmael was not compared. He was not compared to Yitzchak. God says explicitly, everything's going to be given to Yitzchak. So they are not comparable. Yishmael came from a great father as well. So yeah, if you analyze it, we'll analyze it for a second. Yishmael, interesting enough, what was Abraham's greatest trait? His greatest trait was Aknatzas Orchim, of having guests. We learn out when God speaks to him. And he's in the third day of the circumcision, which is the hardest day. And there are 3 Arabs come to the door. He says, "Oh, sorry God, I have to go. I have to take care of these guests." Because he's waiting. He was waiting by the door to have guests. So, rabbis learned from here that having guests is even more important than talking to God. How do I know? Because see it by Abraham. Right? It's learned out by Abraham. He told God to take a walk. You know, very nice. I'm glad you spoke to me, but I have to deal with these, I have to deal with these people now. And, I want to have these guests. So that was his greatest attribute. Was chesed. Of having guests. So, Yitzhak understood that. Yishmael, now if you look at the Arabs in general, they have tremendous haknasas orchim. Right, the worst thing a person can do if they invite you in, as a guest or something, not to go in. Right, we're not talking about fundamentalists here. We're talking about a normal case scenario. If anyone's ever been in an Arab country, so they have guests. It's like it's not something you refuse. Right? That's like the ultimate insult. They invite you in and say, no, it's okay. Or you go in, but you don't eat anything. Or you don't drink anything. That's like the ultimate insult. So, they also had that character trait as well of having guests. They just took it well beyond. They went well beyond what Abraham did. And not necessarily something good. So, they took one aspect of it, and went in the direction that they did. So, the offspring of Yishmael, or Yishmael himself, when Sarah sends him out, Avram is greatly disturbed. And God says, don't worry about it. Sarah knows what she's doing. So the commentaries say he was playing with Yitzhak, and he was trying to kill him actually, and let's play for keeps, so to speak. And he was involved in idolatry and other things. And Sarah says he's the one that Torah is going to get passed down to. So you got to get rid of Yishmael. But again, Yishmael understood who his father was. He understood who his mother was. Didn't turn out so well. See the same thing by Yitzhak. He had Yaakov and he had Esav. Now Yaakov and Esav were pretty much the same, at least till their bar mitzvah. But Esav's desires killed him. Esau was no slouch. He was just as good in Torah learning as Yaakov was. But desire killed him. Same father, same mother. Same grandfather, same grandmother. Destined for greatness, yeah, it went down one side and the other side got destroyed. Right, the other side went by the wayside. So you see, by Esau for sure, desire killed him. But he understood who his father was. He still wanted the blessing. You know, Yaakov literally sends him angels as messengers, and he recognizes that's who they are. He grew up in Yitzhak's house, but he didn't want any part of it. It's a desire that killed him. So pedigree is worth something. It can certainly help you in many, many ways. But in other things, it's not worth anything. My Rebbe's mother, Aleh Shalom, would say that yichus, as they say in Yiddish, yichus dus is a machayev. That genealogy, or your pedigree, only makes you more obligated. So if you come from a great spiritual line and you're a schlep, my language, you don't really amount to anything, you don't, take things too seriously, so what's the pedigree worth? It makes you more obligated. You have more responsibility. Your grandfather was an important rabbi in Europe or in Russia or whatever. You have relatives that were great people, spiritual people. And you turn out the way you do, that's not any great shakes. I mean, if you turn out for the better, so yeah, then pedigree's worth something. It just makes you more responsible. If you don't come from anybody great, I mean, everybody does. You just have to go far back. You just have to go back far enough in order to see that. Everybody's got somewhere. There's no Jew today, that's around who didn't have great, grandparents or great-great-grandparents or, rabbis or whatever that were religious in their family. The only question is how far you go back to find it. Because what happened is once people got to America and they were fleeing from Europe, from all the pogroms and everything else, the last thing they wanted to do was be religious Jews. And then thousands and millions of Jews were being taken away by the socialists, by the communists. So Judaism wasn't something, that they saw as a lasting thing. When they came to the New World, i.e. they came to America, the golden Medina, right, the gold state, so to speak, Judaism was the last thing on their minds. There were people that came, that stuck to their Judaism. Some of them were able to pass it down, and their kids stayed religious Jews. Others didn't, but they had a very difficult time. And the reason is that if you worked on Shabbos, if you didn't work on Shabbos and you kept Shabbos, you didn't have a job on Sunday. So each week would be the same thing. You have a job from Monday to Friday. Take off Shabbos, you don't have a job. It's a tremendous, tremendous test. But you had religious people. You had religious people that stood up to the test, but their kids still went off. Right, so one of the great rabbis of the last generation, Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, may his name be blessed, said one of the reasons that even though the parents were strong, and they kept Shabbos, but the kids kept hearing over and over and over again, Zot sein schwer to be a Yid. Right? It's very difficult to be a Jew. So that's all the kids heard. They didn't hear, how nice it is to keep Shabbos. They didn't hear, great songs being sung, great words of Torah. They just said it. They just heard, doom and gloom. It's hard. It's frustrating. It's this. It's that. Kind of like Armageddon. Like everything's coming down. And it's all bad. And it's so hard. Well, if you give that message over to your kids, they're going to say, what in the world would I want it for? And that's exactly what happened. Even a lot of these people that kept Shabbos, Their kids wanted nothing to do with it. So the kids didn't stay religious. Their main interest was do better than their parents, so they should have financial stability. And they went beyond, the very wealthy generation, the generation after that. They had a lot of money. What do they give to their kids? A little bit of Judaism, because it kept getting watered down. So they got a little bit of Judaism to their kids. And then all these kids intermarried, and then their kids basically got nothing. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster, but that's how it started. So you can have in the best of homes, keeping the holidays, keeping Shabbos, but if they get all the negativity, kids don't want any part of it. I'm just saying in the home, there are other factors that could cause, kids to go sour. Right? One of them is by the parents saying how hard it is. Kids don't want to hear that. Kids want to, okay, they'll do what they have to do and they'll keep what they have to do. They'll keep what they have to keep. But, they should have some fun also. You can't remember, you can't forget that they're still kids. You can't treat a 8, 9-year-old like you would a 20-year-old. You gotta let him have fun also. Okay, he's gonna have long hours and he's gonna learn and he's gonna study and we're gonna make it fun for them. Some people like that structure. And even when they're very younger, they're like, learning around the clock and doing extra things. And yeah, that's tremendous. But other kids, you burn them out. You will burn them out. So, you have to have a balance. You have to have that balance. And if you have a good balance, then the kid should be okay. A kid has to be a kid. You have an obligation to train him. You have an obligation to teach him. Right? You have to teach character traits also. At the same time, you got to let him be a kid. You bring a 5, 6-year-old to synagogue, and you start yelling and screaming at him that he's got to sit there. The kid's got a big ass on his shirt. It's called shpilkes. Kid's moving around. That's what he does. Right? That's what a 6-year-old does. Right? If you get him to sit a little bit, then you let him go. No mitzvah to bring your kid there if you're not going to do anything either. If you're only going to play there, okay, you bring him in a little bit. Let him get the flavor. But you can't stand over him like an ogre and make him sit there for 2 hours or whatever it is. Kid be bored out of his skull. That's, that's normal. Doesn't understand what's going on. He's bored. Obviously you have to teach him prayer. And he has to know how to pray. Right? He'll get that in school also. But at a certain age, when he's ready, you take him a little bit, take him a little bit more, but you gotta have fun. You just can't take him and sit there and chain him down. A, it's not gonna happen. And B, you're gonna kill the kid in the process. When he's older and he gets more mature, okay, then you expect certain things. When he's getting closer to his bar mitzvah, 10, 11, you expect him to be in synagogue. You don't expect him to be running around either. But you got to loosen the rope a little bit. I know, somebody told me a while ago then, coming from church and coming into a synagogue and see like what kids do and like they're running around and this and that, they're like it's like unheard of. Yeah, that may be true. But yeah, you sit there like a robot. That's the whole thing. You're not allowed to question. You're not allowed to say anything. Right? So the kids go, services aren't as long, as it would be on Shabbos. Let's say Shabbos services take, 2.5, 3 hours. Something like that. It's like murder for a kid. You take him to church, it's like 45 minutes. Kid will survive. Right? If he's old enough, he'll survive. And that's not a long time. Like 2-3 hours. You crucify him, no pun intended. There's just no way. There's no way he'll stay there. So you need a balance. If a person brings a kid to synagogue and all they do is just run around and do nothing, okay, that's not, no benefit in that. There needs to be a certain balance. If a kid's 6 or 7 years old, he should be expected to be in synagogue for a certain amount of time. Again, it's not for 3 hours, not even for 2 hours, not even for 1 hour. Let him come in and hear the Torah a little bit, when the Torah is being read, maybe pray a little bit at the beginning, that's it. If there's a bar mitzvah or there's an ofruf where someone's getting married, so that's also a good time to bring them. So, we can beat up everyone else trying to get candies on the floor when they throw candies or whatever. It's also a fun time. But, you have to let a kid be a kid. At the same time, he has to learn, he has to review. There's going to be plenty of what he's going to have to learn. But you got to let him be a kid. If you don't let him be a kid and a person's on top of them all the time, they're going to feel suffocated. And if they don't have any outlets, certainly here in Israel, there aren't so many outlets. Not like, you have leagues for basketball or baseball or any of these things. Those things are out the window. Right? Because here, when it comes to soccer, what they call football here, everything's on Shabbos. Right? So, therefore, if you relate to that, then you're relating to something that, they're not keeping Shabbos. So that's why here they're very strong, against it. I mean, there are other things also. A person gets involved and wants to play all the time and, idolizes these athletes if he ever hears about them, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of negative, definitely a lot of negative things. At the same time, there is an outlet for them. It can be done, in a kosher way. It's just what the whole thing represents is something that they don't want. The establishment doesn't want. And the reason is because they could veer, in a certain direction. They don't want them going. They don't want them to, to idolize these athletes. They're not people to be idolized. The only thing that they can be idolized for is how they play. Right? But it doesn't bring out the greatest character traits, of them. I mean, forget what they do in their personal life. I could, I can make just a whole video on that. So you say, well, who cares what they do in their personal life? I like to see the way they hit a ball. I like to see the way they shoot a ball. Or whatever the case is. That's all I care about. Right, so that may be true. Again, like anything else, you have to ask yourself, by seeing what these people do and how they do it, does that make me better spiritually or not? That's the question. If the answer is no, then the answer is no. It's very hard to differentiate between what the person does, in other words, how they play, or how they cheat, depending on how much steroids they take or whatever, and what they do off the field. I mean, how many times every off season, do we hear of domestic violence, people getting murdered, people getting in fights, all kinds of things. So you say, but I don't care about that. I just want to watch them play. So this is part of the problem also. It's part of a bigger problem. So yeah, the kids have recess, they can play with the ball and this and that, but not something that's necessarily going to be organized. But even for a kid, you need incentives. You need them to stay, quote unquote, on the straight and narrow path by doing what they need to do and learn what they need to learn. But you want to give them incentives. Right? You give them incentives so they want to keep going. Right? Some say incentives aren't such a good idea because it's just a false, it's a false type of thing. Because you're only doing it so they can get something. But at the end of the day, even if that's true, let's say they're not doing it for ulterior motives. For ulterior motives, meaning they're not doing it for the sake of heaven, but they're doing it because they want the prize. So that's okay. The reason it's okay is because it's going to help them, in the future. What they learn and how they learn will strengthen them. So even if it's not done for the right reason, in the end, you could still have the same result. Others will say no. Others will say that giving these type of incentives is not a good thing. It's like a false premise. You're trying to butter them up to do what you want them to do because they're going to get X, Y, or Z. And they're going to see anything associated with learning is going to be to get the prize. I'm not so sure. I think motivation is good. You need to have goals. And you certainly need to be motivated. If you're motivated without goals, or you're not motivated, but there are goals, right? You take the latter. You're not motivated, but there's a reward at the end. That in the end could get you motivated. Education today is a very, it's a very, very tricky, it's a very tricky thing. The one reason is because not everyone's the same. Not everyone thinks the same. Not everyone analyzes the same. Not everyone has the same intelligence. So you got some people that can fall through the cracks. They have a learning disability, other things going on. It's not foolproof. Nonetheless, the idea here is by Aaron HaKohen, and what we can learn for us is to be consistent. Is that we can do things and not change. Now again, we're going to make mistakes and we'll do other things, but we want to be like Aaron. We want to go straight. We don't want to have ups and downs and ups and downs. That's what we have. The reality is that's what we have. We go up and down. We don't stay the same. But ideally, shouldn't we stay the same? Ideally, no matter what happens, aren't we still going to serve God with the same fervor? Every day, doesn't matter what happened the night before or the day before, we're going to say in the morning, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. We're going to serve God with great joy. But if his kid did something, he got to fight with his wife or who knows what, and he wakes up the next day and he's half asleep, he's going to say it the same way he said it the day before when other things happen? Of course not. But see, by Aaron, it didn't matter. He served God equally. It didn't matter what he went through. He put all that aside. Yeah, that's easier said than done. When a person has a difficulty or whatever, you have to come pray the next day or 2 hours later or whatever, you're not in the same mental state. We're much more fragile today in many ways. But we're not in the same mental state. It's a lot harder to do. That was the greatness of who Aaron was. Stayed the same. Nothing stared him. Nothing, got him off balance. Nothing moved his equilibrium. Whatever happened, he took it in stride. And he kept on going. Didn't change him. That's unbelievable. You see, when his sons die, and it says, V'yidom Aaron, he was quiet. In the greatest joy of the Mishkan, the celebration of the Mishkan, and his sons die. It's quiet. Doesn't move to the left, doesn't move to the right, he keeps on going. Doesn't mean he's not sad. Doesn't mean he doesn't feel the loss. These were great people. Has to be understood what happened to them. But these are great people. Doesn't mean Aaron was comatose. It doesn't mean he just, whatever, and he moved on. And it didn't affect him. Of course it affected him. Any person God forbid loses a child, of course it affects them. Right? Part of them is broken. Yeah, 2 great sons. You don't think he was broken? Or he didn't feel the pain? He felt the pain. But he overcame it and served God the way he needed to be served, regardless of the pain. So they say, well, we're not capable of that. Maybe. Right? Maybe Aaron's just on a different plane, totally different level, 100%. But isn't that the ideal? Isn't no matter what happens to us, isn't that the ideal? A person's tired, went to sleep late, has to get up early, right? Has to go pray, he's half asleep. All right, wake yourself up. God's given your soul for another day. Better use it properly. Let's go. Let's move. Imagine if I drank, caffeinated tea, right? You got to keep going. You got to keep moving. You got to keep doing. but you just got 2 hours of sleep. You got 3 hours of sleep. You're like walking in a fog. But you come into synagogue, you gotta prepare. Gotta get yourself ready. Gotta do what you need to do at that level every day. That's hard. So for us, the most important thing is, we're gonna make mistakes. But we want to be consistent. I know we can be as consistent as Aaron was. Probably not. But even in our own lives, people have much more respect, even if they disagree with you, that what you do on a regular basis is consistent. Just want to remind everyone, I have my Intro to Kabbalah class every Tuesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 9 o'clock New York time, where we're discussing Chapter 4, about God running the world and putting man in it and what our purpose is and how we're supposed to function in this world. I also give conversion classes, Noahide classes. You can take a look at my Facebook fan page, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, and take a look at my blog, orthodoxconversion.com. Anyone who wants to contact me can certainly shoot me an email, rabbichaimcoffman@gmail.com, RABBICHAIMCOFFMAN @gmail.com. Everyone have a great Shabbos.